Yeah.
Yep, there we go. So hello.
Hi.
To start off, would you like to say your name and where you are?
My name is Lars Marmgren. I am about, I think, 25 miles south of Göteborg, Gothenburg, on the Swedish west coast, sitting in our house at the sea, looking out. It's a pretty nice autumn. There are some clouds, a bit sun, pretty cold and windy.
Mhm.
Um,
It looks like you have lovely light though.
Yes, it is actually, and it's becomes rather magic when it switches between being cloudy and when the sun comes through and you can see the different shades at the sea.
Hmm.
You can't see it here, but I can turn around so you can see, I guess. Can you see that?
Oh, wow. Oh, I just went to the sea. That was really exciting.
Okay. So
Beautiful.
that's where I am. And being 71 years old, we are sort of in quarantine
Hmm.
because of the corona, and it's been like that for quite some time. Actually, since middle of March.
Yes, same here. Same here. Well, so the first question that I have for you is who are you? I mean, we were introduced by a person who I also don't know over email.
Mhm.
So I have a lot of curiosity about you. I'm interested in, your passions, your values, qualities about yourself, whatever you'd like to say. But who are you as a person?
Um, well, as I said, I'm 71 years old. I am married to Margareta uh, since 47 years. And we've actually been together for 50 years now. Uh, she's also been my colleague in work for the last 25 years. I have had sort of two different professional careers. One as an engineer, and the second one working with organizational development and leadership.
Hmm.
Um, we have three children. They are children, even though they are now very, very grown ups, of course. We have five grandchildren. Uh, and that's the worst part with this self-distancing and isolation is that you can't hug your grandchildren
Hmm.
as you would like.
That's true.
Um, so that's sort of the basics, I
Hmm.
guess. As I said, I've had two different professional careers. I worked for 25 years in the Swedish aerospace industry,
Oh.
um, and had an opportunity to work with many exciting different things there in different positions. Um, then I went through a Gestalt training in the late 80s, and yeah, let's say from the middle of the 90s, I've been working as a consultant. So I like to think of myself as somebody who has a combination of an engineering mind and a mind of a person interested in, let's say, the social reality of life.
Hmm.
So I like to switch between those two views on what's going on. Well, I'd like to use both sides of that personality.
So I'm curious, what does an engineering mind see, or how does it think?
It's rather concrete. It's rather focused on finding solutions. It's um, it's rather natural science oriented.
Mhm.
Um, it believes in facts, and it is interested in seeing connections. It's eager to get results. Um, yeah, and it wants, that part of me wants things to be founded, grounded, I would say, in in basic science and reality,
Hmm.
physical reality.
And what about the other part of yourself?
The other part of myself is interested in the the world we create together for us as human beings, and how we make meaning together,
Hmm.
um, and why we make meaning in different ways together, um, why we uh, sometimes disagree in a way that for somebody like me, for example, seems uh, quite difficult to understand. Um, why we have sometimes extreme difficulties in getting into action to solve problems that seems to be obvious to us that we need to solve.
Hmm.
And so that's where my interest is. And I think that what is the common, let's say, denominator, if you like, in these two sides that interest me is that they are both about how do we get into action?
Hmm.
How do we together do something meaningful?
Hmm. Okay. And I'm sure that there's a lot more complexity. It's kind of a false polarization, I guess, of yourself there, but
Yeah,
that's an interesting common ground.
yeah. But it is an interesting common ground. And I think that the older I get and the more I think about it, I think the more obvious for me it is that unless we can accept that these two parts of reality are equally real and that they constantly interact with each other, but that they are partly following different laws, if you like. And we need to understand both, the laws of social interaction and the laws of the physical reality to be able to, do something reasonably meaningful in the world.
Meaningful and balanced comes to
Yeah,
mind when I hear you.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Huh.
Yes.
Okay. So those are some of the parts of yourself. And I'm curious, I like this question, is what values would you say that you orient yourself around?
Um, I mean, that's a difficult question. If it doesn't, if it becomes easily very banal. I think I believe in justice and equality, and reasonably same opportunity for all people. I believe that all people have the equal type of rights. I believe that we are different, but we have the equal type of rights. Um, I also believe that there needs to be a balance in society where the differences does not become too large, because that I think hurts all of us,
Mhm.
both those at the top and those at the bottom, actually. Um, yeah, I believe in decency.
Hmm.
I mean, so when I say this, it sounds like, yeah, doesn't everybody believe like that?
Well, maybe. Maybe in some level, but it's always interesting. I mean, these are very gestalty questions. It's just
Yeah,
the figures that pop up always come up for everyone in different orders. I think
absolutely.
a lot of us can relate to all of them, but it's just some of the question of priorities.
Yeah,
So,
I think you're right. I think also why I'm struggling with finding these, let's say, values interesting is that, I mean, they are interesting, obviously, uh, but fairness and uh, the uh, the value that you believe that everybody shouldn't have equal opportunities to succeed in life and stuff like that. my experience is that if you say that to people, even from different backgrounds, different political interests, and so forth, they would all agree.
In
More or
principle.
less. But then, you know, we disagree completely on how to achieve it,
Hmm.
what it means in practicality or whatever. So I become more and more interested in not the values in such that we use to describe what we think is good or bad, but the worldview that we have, which sort of makes us think, how do we achieve these good things and avoid those bad things that our values say? I think that's where my interest lies, and that's partly also why I'm interested in Gestalt actually,
Mhm.
because
And
Gestalt
what do
is
you mean by worldview?
by worldview I mean our view on um, how things are related to each other in the world, and how the different parts out there interact together to create the world as we see it, around us, for example.
Mhm.
It's about how cause and effect works, for example, or when it doesn't work.
Mhm.
So it's about how we think, why we think, or why we think things are as they are. You see,
Okay.
worldview is, I think, the explanation that we have for why things are as they are.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah. And what were you going to say about Gestalt and why?
Well, I think the for me, Gestalt is actually about meaning making.
Mhm.
I think that was the great insight that Max Wertheimer and company realized in the beginning of the last century, that we actually create meaning individually
Mhm.
from the context that we are in, but also from the ground that we carry with us based on our experiences and education, knowledge, whatever. So, and that every figure that is formed in a particular situation is the result of the situation, the impulses, and me as the individual, how I make meaning out of where I am.
Mhm.
Right. That's for me is the essence of the figure formation process, or what I call the Gestalt formation process. And I
Mhm.
think it's brilliant.
Mhm. Yeah. So this is a question, I guess it's a little bit about your individual ground that you bring into it. And it's what comes up to you as an event or as a set of circumstances in your life that have really shaped who you are in some way or how you see the world.
I think that's a very difficult question actually, and I don't know if that is because as an individual, it seems that in my experience, you know, insights and when I change opinions about things seems to be a very slow process. I don't know, maybe it's because I'm extremely stubborn. It takes so much for me to change my opinion. I don't know. But it's not like, this happens. And because of that, I suddenly changed my view on things. No,
Mhm.
I don't think it's like that for me. I think it's a slow, slow process.
Mhm.
Um, so, I've
But
observed.
what about sort of those original understandings? I mean, some people, when I ask this, usually people refer to things that happened early in their life, where it's sort of where their first understanding was shaped of how things are or who they are.
Yeah. It's the, of course, it's impossible not to realize that you are extremely shaped by your childhood and your parents and the small family that you are in. So even though I'm now 71 years old and my brother is 77, I'm still the little brother, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So that's I carry with me, hopefully, forever. And another thing that shaped me from my early childhood is my sort of the belief that my mother had that I was quite intelligent and should study and be successful in professional life and so forth. So that's probably something that shaped me early when I studied and when I got my first job and so forth. That's something that period of long indoctrination of different sorts that creates something that means that you have a particular view on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's probably an important part that shaped me and how I look upon myself,
Mm-hmm.
I guess. And I could also say that I had the same. Maybe it's bad luck or good luck. And I worked almost about 20 years in the same company as an engineer and as a manager and so forth. And I had the good luck, I would say, to have very good managers who believed in me. So like my mother, in a way, I can think about that afterwards, saying, Lars, you're a good guy. You can do good things. So they
Mm-hmm.
gave me tougher assignments, higher positions in the hierarchy, etc., etc. So I guess that enforced that view that, I can do good things if I try.
Okay. So another question, and I know that this is very different in different social contexts. You talked just now about, reinforcing sort of your own values and your own qualities and your worth. But how do you understand yourself in terms of privilege or your position of privilege in the society that you live in? I mean, I tend to ask this question more to older white men.
Okay.
And I don't know if this is something that you think about or that you consider.
I've thought about a similar question, I think, quite a lot actually, but more in the terms of belonging to a particular generation in a particular place on Earth. And by that I mean that, I think that there are perhaps no other generation that has had better possibilities than mine, being born just after the Second World War in a country like Sweden that was not part of the Second World War and not devastated like most of the rest of Europe, for example. So everything was intact. And we had, during my upbringing, 20, almost 30 years of constant growth, and everything became better and better and better. And I would say that almost everybody, regardless of background, had the opportunity to go to good schools, had good healthcare, had the opportunity also to go to university, regardless of background. If you had good grades in school, for example, and everything was for free, if you like, because
Mm-hmm.
that was what the government supported us with, and they could afford to do that actually during these years. So in that sense, I feel extremely privileged, actually. And I think also that during that period of time, you know, we had Sweden was an extremely homogeneous nation. Um, we had no, I would say, well, that's exaggerating. I was going to say we had no race difficulties. We had our northern Sami population, for example, which was treated badly. We had our well, there were also other parts that was not treated equally, but I think that was gradually becoming better and better. We never had those type of race problems that you've had in many other countries like the US, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, And during also my upbringing, there were more and more equal opportunity between men and women also, I would say, in Sweden. My wife wouldn't agree 100% perhaps, but I can only say my own opinion about this.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. So
We have
another
been privileged.
Well, I mean, it's not a question that there were no difficulties or that there were no challenges. It's just a question of, I think, everyone becoming more aware of what privileges we do have.
Yes. And I think also, if I can add that, what is disturbing for me at my age now is that I'm seeing a society that is not as good as giving equal opportunity to everybody in the country as it was when I was a kid. And that makes me sad and a bit, frustrated also, I would say.
I think that's usually an issue with privilege, is that when it's installed, it becomes very comfortable. And then actually giving some of that away is where the difficulties start to emerge. So you mentioned a couple times your age. I'm also curious how you experience this part of your life, this age.
There are two sides of it, I think. The one is that at my age now, you're becoming more and more aware that you are physically not as fit as you were 20 years ago. At the same time, I must say I'm lucky. So I'm okay. So I can still do physical activities, and I don't have any big problems with my body and so forth. But you become more aware of it. You realize that it's not getting better; it's getting worse. And you just try to see that as a graceful degradation, if you like. So, but that's part of realizing that we are mortal. The other side of it is, since I am now more or less totally retired, I have some small things that I do. And that is the fact that you are not part of the professional life anymore. And that is, it has its blessing. You have more time for playing golf and doing other things, but it's also a sense of loss. And I think it is a sense of loss because I've always had a sort of, one of my driving forces, I think at least, is to be able to contribute. And that you realize there's less and less of that, actually, the less you work. Because working is such an easy way to see that you do contribute one way or the other, isn't it?
It's sort of inclusion and marginalization.
Yeah.
And I do feel that. I mean, a lot of my friends and colleagues are in their 70s and 80s. And I do feel that loss. It's just the accumulated wisdom. Maybe it doesn't just need to sit there. I mean, I appreciate everyone's right to slow down, but there is a sense of loss when it's put aside.
It is. And I agree with you because, I think that partly that I think is an illusion, but sometimes I think that now I know more things now than I did 20 years ago, so I should be better at contributing. That's not completely true because I don't have the same energy. I'm not as quick, in my way of thinking and acting as I was, but still that is something that could be useful, I think.
Okay. Well, I think the last more personal question that I would ask is, in the course of your life, who have you met? Like, who would be another human being who you would say has influenced you in a significant way? And if you'd like to say a little bit about how.
I mean, there's no question for me about that. That's my wife. We've been together for 50 years. And, furthermore, for the last 25 years, we worked together. So there's no question that she is the one who's influenced me most.
Would you like to say a bit about how?
Yeah, I can say a bit about how. One thing is that it's because of Margareta that I actually got into Gestalt at all, because she did that first, having had a quite different type of work than I had. So she went through the Gestalt training in Sweden and Denmark in the mid 1980s, and when she did that, I also, for different reasons, got interested and curious. So I did that too. So that's obviously had a great impact on my life, in the sense that I would probably not have left my other career, my first career, unless that had happened. So that's for sure. And so, when you work together closely and you live together closely, there is an automatic sort of influence on each other that you have. Much of it you don't even realize, probably. Even though from an intellectual perspective, you understand it. It has to happen, of course. But then there are more, obvious things that you can relate to and see clearly. But that's in my private sphere, so that I won't talk about here.
No, that's fine. So this is how you came to Gestalt therapy. Switching to that part is you were invited, and I'm curious what it is that attracted you to Gestalt. What is it that you found there that made sense for you?
I think there were two things, initially, and I think that goes for anybody that I've met who came into a Gestalt therapy context, if you like, is that you cannot help being influenced and grabbed by the experience that you have by sharing your innermost feelings together with other people who are doing the same. So it's something extremely, how shall I put it, rewarding, being in that situation with other human beings. And you get a contact and a closeness that is exceptional, I would say. So that's what attracted me first. And particularly, and I used to joke about that, since I had this other background, being, a Master of Science engineer in electronics, and then working in a very high-tech company, and then coming into this context where, to put it simply, you are asked to, leave your head outside the room and get in with your body, and then see what happens, sort of. So it's a stark contrast, if you like, between those two. So, and it takes some time, at least it took some time for me to sort of merge these two worldviews, if you like, together, that I talked about earlier here, because they do belong together in my mind, very much so. But it's not easy in the beginning to see that they actually do.
Now, to see it or to experience it.
Sorry?
To experience it more than just seeing or understanding it.
Yes, you have to experience that. And that took me some time, a couple of years, I would say, to merge those two together. So that's, was rewarding in the sense that I got types of feedback that I didn't get in my other type of life, if you like. Now the second part that interested me in Gestalt was more around the way you think about how we function as human beings, individually and together. Okay, So that's more that I, from Gestalt, and in combination with some other stuff that I also took um, in the late 80s and the beginning of the 1990s, about system thinking and so forth. Gregory Bateson, which is one of my true sort of icons. It gave me a slightly different worldview on how we function as human beings. And that also made it obvious to me that, and I think still, that I think the greatest benefit that you can have using this type of methodology, if you like, is in organizations and bigger systems. That's where let's say, the set of concepts that we have in Gestalt is unique, because I haven't seen that anywhere else.
And that's actually my next question is, what have you done with this? Where has it taken you? So
Yeah.
Do you want to say a bit more about?
Sure. It's I talked earlier about the figure formation process, and I think that the brilliant insight that the early Gestaltists got about how we create meaning. Now, for me, it also became obvious that what we are doing together in organization is actually constantly trying to create collective gestalts, if you like. We have something that we have a need, we have a problem, or whatever you might call it, that we agree upon we need to do something about. And in order to do that, we actually have to sit down together or find a way to see that we can create a common ground, that we can create some common figures, so we can get into action together. Okay. So taking this from the individual perspective to the group perspective or the organizational perspective, that's where I've spent the last 20 years or so, trying to find ways to talk about it and methods to work with it, if you like. So it's about, I would say, the last 20 years, when Margareta and myself have been working with management teams and organizations. It's been around creating common gestalts so that they can get to action together. And then there is a lot more to say about that, but that's sort of the core of it.
It's interesting. When you say that, I'm curious. I've been speaking to a number of people who are involved in organizational work, and I wonder, in that sphere, does the same thing happen that happens for like the individual clinical gestaltists? Is your perspective marginal compared to other organizational approaches?
It's I would say yes and no, and I try to explain that, okay? One of the things that I also learned, and we learned together when we work with this, Margareta and myself, is that the less gestaltish you make the way you speak, the easier it is to get people to understand it, if you like. So more common, the more common words you can use, the easier it is. And if you think about it, when you talk about, if I would say to a management team that, okay, guys, now we need to create a common gestalt. Let's start doing that. They would say, what's this guy talking about? But if I start to talk about, okay, now we need to find a way to see if, we agree upon, let's say, the facts that we are dealing with here. So what do we know about the situation? What do you know about the situation? Let's share that and see that we can create a common ground, I could say, use that. And that's easy, understand. And it's also, obvious that, that sounds reasonable. We ought to do that, even though we don't do it usually because we don't have time to talk in that way. So we can create a common ground. we usually jump directly to suggest solutions, okay? But when you talk about it in that way, then, most times, no problem. Okay, yes. Maybe we need to add an extra hour to our management meeting, and that's okay. So if you can start in that way, you can use let's say, the Gestalt methodology without using the Gestalt jargon. And in that place, in that way, I think there is hardly any resistance, because it's so much common sense in this. There's so much common sense.
And I'm smiling as I'm listening to you, just because I hear a lot of frustrated individual or small group clinicians who do therapy, who keep asking themselves, why can't we make a larger impact?
Yeah.
And I think, as I'm listening to you, what's making me smile is just understanding that it seems like some of the more gestalty things, they just become your ground. And it's the way that you are approaching the situation that you come into. It's not making the people that you're meeting, do these exercises and do these things, but it's your ground and it's your perspective that it gives you.
Absolutely, and exactly. I totally agree with you.
Okay. So I mean, that's one thing that people in these interviews keep saying is we need to make more of an impact. But I think that they're trying to imagine, having a larger portion of the world do Gestalt therapy exercises, rather than experiencing some of these things that you're talking about, like a different kind of collective meaning making and common ground. And
exactly.
Okay.
So I think that we gave up that very, very quickly, trying to sort of, let's say, go out there and sell Gestalt as an idea, and make people into believers. But what happened is that if you use your own perspective when working with, for example, groups like I said earlier, then quite often they get interested and curious. That's interesting. Why haven't we thought about this? And then you can start bringing in the concepts. Okay, this is the way I think about it. This is the cycle of experience. This is the tool that I use when I try to work with you guys, for example, and see this is the way it works. Aha, interesting. Can I read about that somewhere? Yeah. We have a book here.
Do you have a book? Have you written?
Yes, I have a book.
Oh.
Actually, here.
Oh. People at Work. Okay.
People at Work. Yeah.
Gestalt methodology and management. Okay, I'll have to find that.
Please do. Okay. It's actually something that we also did. That was quite rewarding. For 10 years or so, we ran a program, a 1-year program with people who were interested in learning the basics in Gestalt methodology for working in organizations. We developed a concept and a way of thinking, and a number of things that we wanted to teach them during these. We had 5 sessions of 4 days when we worked with them. So we had quite some time, actually. And then we realized we needed some type of compendium or something. So I wrote the book out of the content that we had when we ran the program, if you like. So, and added some extra stuff that you can do when you sit in your chamber and think more thoroughly, do things. So that's the way it came up.
Interesting. So I'm also curious, in these processes, in the work that you've been doing, what would you identify as some of the major challenges that you've had to work through? And I mean, it can be specific to a particular situation, or challenges that you've run up against in general.
You mean in general when I work as a consultant in organizations? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Well,
or if you think there's a more significant challenge in a different area, I'm also curious.
There is something that we, if you like, have talked quite a lot about, and it is the problem of actually making a long-term difference when you are working in an organization. I think that is, for me, that's the holy grail of organizational change work. We haven't got it yet.
Mm.
So, and it is about, many times in many different organizations, we've had the opportunity to work with top management team people. And we have also managed, I think, quite well sometimes to create an atmosphere of enhanced trust in those groups, which, in turn creates different type of conversations so they actually can do things differently. And we have introduced also these ideas about, you have to spend time building common ground, etc., blah, blah, blah. And then what almost always happens is that after some time, there is a reorganization, or there is another person coming in at the top of the organization. And most of what you have been doing is more or less destroyed, okay, from the organizational perspective. I still think that the individuals who have been participating in these, meetings and the work that they bring something with them. But the organizational impact is to a large extent lost. See? So what you are doing is that you are constantly fighting against structures that is outside of your control, in the sense that you are trying to build trust between different parts of an organization to see that they actually work in a different way. And then there is a reshuffling, and new and different boundaries are created. And, it's sort of, you start all over again, in a way. Mm-hmm. Unless you would have the opportunity to put all 2,000 persons or 50,000 persons, at the same time on a course. But you can't do that. You can never do that, actually. So this is how do you create something that can carry over time? Mm-hmm. This is the constant problem. And of course, in this is that regardless of whether you are working in a private equity company, which is controlled by the stock market, or if you work in a state-controlled organization, which is controlled by political influences, for example, there are contextual limitations, and also powers that are in operation that you just cannot, deal with. Mm-hmm. So it's like you're fighting for, a good cause surrounded by structures that doesn't really support those good causes. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. I mean, you can't change the fundamental pillars of the organizations. I mean, you can't make a company that's designed to produce a material good into a social welfare company. You can't change the basic nature.
No.
But I hear that there is meaning in changing the how it works, how it operates, how it relates.
Yes. And I think there is also a tipping point, if you have enough time and if you have enough resources, you can probably tip a big organization over the edge as well. But I've also seen big organizations who have been working in this, I would say, rather Gestaltist way. And then if there is a takeover, for example, and a different type of philosophy is introduced on how to run the company, then, suddenly people get lost. So because there's a different control and command system at hand here. Mm-hmm. And what was right yesterday is wrong today. Mm-hmm. So how do I deal with this? So that's the challenge that I was thinking about when you asked the question.
Mm-hmm. And I am also curious about the other side of that, which would be an achievement, like something that you feel has actually worked, something you've been able to create, something significant in all of this work.
Yes. The um, if you have been working for 25 years, you ought to be able to say something about that.
You would think, unless you really like a challenge.
Actually, that is one assignment that I did 10-ish years ago, something like that. And I won't say what type of organization it was even. Um, but I was approached by somebody who said to me, Lars, we have been working with this now for 10 years, and the culture is bad. The When we had our last what you call that, when you ask people about what they think, how they think the company is doing and what's going
The
on.
evaluations.
Evaluation, yes.
Mhm.
And we have never seen such bad results. There's no support for management. People feel completely disengaged and so forth. And we just had a new manager coming in 9 months ago, and sort of, what shall we do? We don't really think this is solvable, but would you can you try? And I actually went in there and talked, of course, to the manager, who was extremely frustrated, didn't know what to do. And you come into a situation which is understandable when you feel that the people in the organization are like kids, more or less. And what you would like to do is, like the teacher, say, shit, it has to be order here, and you can't do that. It just doesn't work. So I said, let's keep calm here for a while. And then I started walking around and doing interviews. This was a reasonably small organization, 60, 70, 80, something like that. That's at 70 people. I probably talked to 40, 50 of them. And I got a picture of how they were thinking, and also why they were frustrated. And we set up a series of meetings in groups of 7, 8 people, so forth, where I, together with the manager, who was also sitting there because it was important to listen in, and I described to them what I've heard, and it was also how should I put it? I recognized. Today, I would say that I recognized their worldview. I understood how they were thinking, and I understood why they thought the way they thought, because there were good reasons for them also to feel frustrated.
Mhm.
They were governed by a system. This was a part of a bigger organization with a command and control structure that demanded, savings, 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 because they were in a situation where the prospects weren't that good. But it also meant that everything became petty, mean details for all those involved. And of course, sooner or later, people, just said, shit, I'm not going to do this anymore. But when they got the, let's say, the support of being understood, okay, that was enough for sort of the shoulders to fall down a bit, and you could start talking about, okay, so what are the things? And interesting, what I did, and I told that to the manager, go to the union, because the union was part of this, and say, let them write down, everything they think is wrong right now, and they think that they want you to make better. Okay? And she said, I can't do that because that would be impossible. They will just puke a lot of things. Now, okay, let them puke them. So she got a list with 95 different items. So we sat down together with the trade unions, and she started to say, okay, thank you very much for this. This is very important. Now, perhaps we can, during the next 6 months, start by dealing with the 3 or 4 most important things that you think is, we need to do here. Which immediately meant that they also focused on trying to find out not how you solve 95 things, but which are the most important ones. Okay? So they started working together of slowly getting small pieces better and better and better. Now, about 1 year after we had finished this work together, they made another one of these, appraisals, and it had, from the worst thing that I've ever seen in this big organization, they went up to above normal. And I know that it stayed like that for at least 3 or 4 years afterwards because I kept in touch with them. So that is one of the few examples that I've seen a concrete and lasting change depending on a rather short but intense intervention in the organization. So something went very well there. Mm-hmm. And when you look upon that afterwards, I can also say that, yeah, I think that without me being there and doing what I did, it wouldn't have happened. Mm-hmm. But of course, that's not enough. There has to be circumstances around that can support something like that. There has to be a manager who, despite feeling that she it was a woman, was being very unfairly attacked, can shrug this off and actually, be cooperative. Mm-hmm. Even though she got blamed for a lot of things that was not her fault. So there is some type of grandness that has to be there to be able to act in the way that she did. There also has to be enough support in an organization within people so they have enough loyalty between each other and towards the organization that they say, okay, now that we've been heard, let's roll up the sleeves and do something. So, mm-hmm. But, there were a lot of circumstances that made this possible. But it's mm-hmm. an interesting example for me, and it gives me hope because, okay, it's happened once, it can happen more times.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, as I've been listening to you, I'm imagining, this is totally my idea, but that you seem to have developed two things, which is an enjoyment of the process, even though the product isn't, there shining right away at the end all the time. And similarly, a tolerance for frustration in going in and doing the process work and not necessarily getting immediate gratification.
Yeah, it is, yes. And you see, it's, you do get immediate gratification in the small sense, okay?
Yes.
Because when you work with people, you see the small things happening all the time, okay? Mm-hmm. So that, I think, is what keeps you going. Mm. What you do not get is the big gratification on seeing that, oh shit, we've changed the world here.
Ta-da! Yeah.
Okay. But I think that it's so important that when you work the way we work, that you can see the small improvements all the time. You can see the insights. You can mm-hmm. see when people talk to each other in a different way than they did yesterday, for example. Mm-hmm. And suddenly creating things they couldn't do yesterday because they talk to each other in a different way. Mm-hmm. And therefore, the level of trust raises. Yeah, that, the process mm-hmm. that goes on.
Yeah. Yeah, just... Mm-hmm. Okay. I would like to ask, those are my impressions, but I'm curious how you would say that all of this work and the Gestalt part of it in particular has affected you as a person.
Yeah. That was a difficult question. I've probably become I was going to say wiser, meaning that it's easier to, how shall I put it? I think I can use my example, the success example, if you like.
Mhm.
I think it's easier to understand my part when it goes well, and also not exaggerate that, and also understand my part when it goes less well, and also not exaggerate that.
Mhm.
Because we are constantly working with, things, people, organizations, where the question of, you know, the question of control is an illusion,
Mhm.
where you never ever see a clear cause and effect
Mhm.
uh, result, where there is always multiple interconnected things. Some of them you understand and can do something about. Some of them you understand and can't do anything about, and some of them you don't even see. Okay?
Mhm.
So in the middle of this mess, what you can do is do your best and see what happens. Yeah, that's probably.
Yeah, it sounds like it's made you humble in just being honest of, this is my reality. This is what I can and can't do.
Yeah, I think that's, and it's, at the same time, it doesn't have, and I'm not working so much anymore. Those I don't. It's more like saying to people who, if anybody would be listening to this, to say that don't let that disencourage you, okay? Because people who are doing good things can always make a difference.
Hmm.
So that's what you need to hang on to.
Hmm.
If you do things with good intentions in a good way, then you have probably made the world a tiny bit better.
Hmm. Okay. So I guess the last thing that I would really ask you is what's next? And I know we talked about this a bit at the beginning, but where do you think, is there a project that you have coming up, or for yourself as a person, or for Gestalt?
I've written a few books, 3 to be precise, and I think that if I can get the energy, uh, I would like to write at least one more book. The thing is that I I don't have the frame for it yet, really, but I would love to be able to write something um, meaningful and useful um, about Gestalt and society. Um, and this is, I think, more to be around how the concepts in Gestalt, if you like, or the way that I said in the beginning. For me, Gestalt is about the way of thinking around how we human beings are, okay? And how human systems are, whether it's organizations or bigger systems like society. Because I think that there is a set of concepts that I think is very, very useful. And particularly today, when we are living in a world that is becoming more and more polarized, and where there are people who are, you know, talking as if there is no truth whatsoever anywhere. Okay, and it's saddening and it's stupid, because one of the guiding thoughts that I've had working with people in organization is that, in order to get into meaningful action, there are three things you need. Okay, you need to be aware of what is. What are the data? What are the facts around the issue that we are talking about? Okay? What do we know? The second one is, why is it like this? What is the worldview that we can use in order to make sense of the situation that is as it is right now? Because we have to have a view on why things are as they are. Otherwise, we are just going blind. Okay? But if we have those two things, we can actually together think about, okay, what are our options? What are the possible alternative interventions that we can do here, okay, to get into action, mobilize energy together? But today, when you can't even agree on the first step, then you're lost, okay? So, we need to have a second enlightenment, that we bring ourselves back 2 steps and say, okay, what do we actually know? Because now we are living in a world where it seems like everybody is entitled to their own worldview. And that's fine, okay? But that's not the same that to say that every worldview is equally good, because it's not. 2,000 years ago, we thought that shamans could solve medical problems by, praying to the gods or whatever. That's a worldview, if you like. But it's better to have vaccines or antibiotics. It's a more workable worldview. So all worldviews are not equally good. And we need to sort that out a bit. So we are living in this terrible situation where you can have reasonably intelligent people, like even politicians, sort of talking about alternative facts, or we're living in a post-reality, or as if they are using deep philosophical things to justify idiotic actions. It was like when Einstein, more than 100 years ago, came up with the theory of relativity. Suddenly people start talking, oh, everything is relative. No, shit, it's not. In the practical world that we're living, it's not. Mm-hmm. Or like when quantum physics, everything about statistics and you can't know anything for sure and so forth. Yeah, that's true if you're a quantum physicist. Mm-hmm. But you're a carpenter. Yeah. That's not a valid worldview there. Yes. Well, you see what I mean?
I understand, and that's, you just said 2 of the things that, terrify me the most, which is the post-truth world, and just that extreme sense of not having a common ground, just everyone floating on completely different, ungrounded realities.
Exactly.
And I wonder how to work from that.
Yes.
But
so that,
I think that's the next, that's, where I'm left wondering, okay, well, now what do we do with this? This is where we are.
So that is, I think, the major challenge for us now. And it would be wonderful if, by using what we know from Gestalt, the Gestalt concepts, and how we think about the world, and what we know about creating dialogue, for example, if we can, in a small way, contribute to this mess being solved in a better way.
I can hope. I can hope. Okay. Well, is there anything else that you would like to add at this point?
I don't know. So have you had a picture, a bit of a picture of who I am and how I? what I've been doing.
I have. I've very much enjoyed this conversation, and I am left with one curiosity, which is what makes you smile.
Um, what makes me smile always, almost, is my grandchildren.
Mhm.
That's the easiest and most truthful statement, I would say.
Yeah, I imagined.
That's why I miss that so much right now.
Mhm. All right, well, my dogs are going crazy. Is it okay with you if we leave this here then?
All right.